Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butz, get big or get out.
You know, it's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca. Explore Ithaca's waterfalls, orchards, and craft beverage scene. Plan your getaway at visitithaca.com.
Hello to everyone. I'm Louisa Kasdan, your host for Let's Talk About Food, a podcast devoted to first-person storytelling where food plays a pivotal, if not a starring role. Everyone has a food story. Food is at the heart of human connection, at the center of love, of ritual, of need and want, and most of all, food creates community. And community is what we crave. Matthew Martin is a remarkable man. To date, Matt and his volunteers have fed over 39 million hungry people around the world, in Haiti, in New England, and now over 1 million meals to Ukraine. Homeless in college, Matt became a Lutheran minister and assumed he'd spend his life as a youth minister living quietly somewhere in the Midwest. But that's not what happened. Let's have a listen.
I grew up in a single mother home. I have an older brother, a younger sister, and we were churchgoers every Sunday. We're Lutheran from the Midwest. I hadn't planned on becoming a pastor, certainly. I went off to college and studied what I thought was going to be a career in maybe business or communications. Halfway through my college career, I was homeless. Halfway through my high school career, I almost died of a ruptured appendix. So I had a couple pretty tumultuous times there in just a few years. So I was going to a very expensive college, and my parents couldn't afford to help me, being that they were divorced. My mom's a waitress, my dad's a truck driver, so they were barely making it. And I got halfway through and I just ran out of money. I was trying to work my way through college, working full-time, going to school full-time, and your body just reaches a limit even when you're 20. So I just took a semester off, decided it was better to have no expenses. So I just lived out of the trunk of my car and grabbed a couple pizza delivery jobs because I got free food, and I just relied on my friends that I had made in my first couple years of college to support me with housing, kind of impromptu each night. So I never did have to sleep in my car, but it was October, November, and December in Minnesota, which are not really tropical months. So I had just worked about 100 hours a week, made about $15 an hour, which is kind of laughable that, you know, I've been out of college now for a decade, 2 decades and a half, 25 years into this adult journey of a career, and the minimum wage is still not $15 an hour until January 1st. So I, with no expenses and all that hours and that high wage at the time, I just got enough money to get back into college. When I got back, I kind of glanced back over my last 100 days and realized all the people that cared for me were the Christians on campus. So I thought ministry might be worth exploring. So the other half of my college career was just figuring out what I wanted to do with my life so that more people didn't have to go through what I had just gone through. And the answer seemed to be youth ministry. So I got ordained so that I could do really credible youth ministry within a church. And I found my way quickly into mission work with the youth, I went on 26-week-long trips with youth over the summers. Did a lot of 30-hour famines. I think 16 years in a row we did that, where youth actually experienced hunger. And then I kind of just naturally went right into seminary. After becoming a pastor, I did youth work for 9 years. Unfortunately, it took me 9 years of education to become a youth pastor in the Lutheran Church, so not the best return on investment.
Why does it take 9 years? 9 years after college?
So you have to have a college degree and a master's degree. And in order to be a youth pastor, I had a master's in youth and family ministry. So I actually have 2 master's degrees. My wife got a master's in elementary ed, so we were going to be a preacher and a teacher. That was the idea. And we were doing what we did with youth, and she worked with kids. She was a 4th grade teacher. And then we got to this kind of strange phase for us. We had a couple small children and almost no money because kids are expensive, and we were a preacher and a teacher. So we were actually given a vacation. We hadn't had a vacation in 5 years because we had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we went on the trip. It was kind of on accident that we even met the person that gave us the trip. We were at a conference, and we were just having discussion about school debt, and I had the most out of everybody there. And this particular pastor, her husband, was a doctor at the Mayo Clinic, so they had lots of money but not a lot of time, and we had summers that were, other than our youth mission trips, we kind of had a lower summer availability to go places, but we never had any money to go somewhere. And they had a vacation paid for that they gave us. And honestly, to this day, I cannot remember the pastor's name even, because I met her at the conference. We went on the vacation. It was to Virginia. It's where they always went over the summer. We're enjoying the week-long vacation with our 2 little kids, and my wife woke up and said, we need to move to New England. So I just mentioned that we've been out of college for 25 years. We got married right before we finished college, so we were about halfway into our married life at this point. When we went on that trip, and she said, we need to move to New England. I can't explain why. It just called the bishop, and everything to that point had worked when I just went with, what.
Had she ever been to New England?
So we had only ever been to New England once. We got married in August, so every summer in the 8 years before we had any children, we did go on a camping trip usually, and we went to Bar Harbor once. So loved it. Kind of hit all the New England states, and never imagined we'd ever be back because there's so many places to go in the world. When she said we need to move to New England, I was like, I'm not even sure what states are in New England. Like, you could quiz me right now, and I'm having trouble remembering that, much less all the names of these little states we went through. So when we ended up calling up the bishop, I explained what I had done with my career thus far in ministry, and she said, we have this perfect fit for you. It's in Quincy. And I had no idea what state Quincy was even in. I had never even heard of it. Our first call was in Illinois, so we pronounced it Quincy, Illinois. But we were just kind of shocked that this was going to happen. The call process takes about 4 months to get through, and we ended up relocating, and we got here. We had spent 5 or 6 years with this youth ministry mission stuff, feeding about 1 million people overseas, doing this meal packaging gig that I now do full time and have for 11 years. But we arrived with just one assembly line, but the next day after we arrived, the Haiti earthquake happened. And 80 or 90% of their buildings fell down. There was a couple hundred orphans that our church was connected to, this church we've been serving for 24 hours. And they said, hey, let's take that assembly line, let's pack some meals, let's get them to Haiti. So we started doing that. And did that for 18 months, because anytime there's a crisis like Ukraine, it languishes for years usually, and decades even. Haiti's still recovering, and then they got hit with Hurricane Matthew. So it's like there's always a need globally, but all the hunger work I had done up to that point was world hunger. There wasn't really a thought to local hunger. But we served that church for 18 months, discovered that there was more hungry people on the planet than there had ever been. It had reached 1 billion for the first time, and there was 7 billion people on the planet at that point, 11 years ago. So it was 1 out of 7. It was super easy math. But in Maine, 1 out of 3 kids were hungry, and in America, 1 out of 4 kids were hungry. So we were like, maybe the reason we got called out here in this weird way is to do this hunger thing, because no one had ever done it before. The people in Quincy, this was all brand new to them, really anybody in New England. And it started to get known in our synod, which is all the Lutheran churches in New England. We thought maybe this is the time to figure out what we're actually supposed to be doing. My wife never did get a teaching job, so she wasn't teaching. She was raising our children and tutoring, and she ended up writing a book and then wrote another book. So she's now an author, and I'm the meal packaging guy.
Where are you getting the food? What's an assembly line? How does the packaging actually happen? Just break it down for me, because I don't know. I've never experienced it. So let me know. How actually are you doing this?
The way it worked is that Pastor Mark's church, their sanctuary space was, you could clear all the chairs out of it, so you have to set these tables up somewhere. And we didn't have a warehouse at the time. We were just starting this. So when he said, hey, I'll help you start that meal packaging gig if you help me start my church, I'm like, sweet. We moved down to Marshfield, and we got that one assembly line we had, and we started kind of just showing people how the process works. So if you can envision a couple long tables, 8-foot long rectangular tables, kind of end to end, that makes up an assembly line in size. The first table is a bunch of bins pouring different ingredients through a funnel. When we first started, Outreach had never packed a domestic meal. They'd never had a regional program. So everything that had done had been since my boss and his wife retired. They'd been at the international deal 7 years, just packing all the meals we can. I had been doing it with a different organization for the past 6 years. So we kind of started at the same time, but the whole game at that point was feeding people overseas. When the Haiti earthquake happens, or a tsunami somewhere, there's an earthquake here or there, any natural disaster where there's a bunch of people, like the Ukraine situation where there's refugees, it was always sending meals overseas. But they had to be funded and packed somewhere. That was happening here in America, many different organizations, and then they'd get on a boat, on a plane, they'd go somewhere else. But it became a domestic thing when we kind of transitioned down to Marshfield.
So what are you feeding them? When you say pouring it in through a funnel and going, I'm wondering, I'm sure you're not sending anything that isn't shelf stable. So
Yep.
when you say you're packaging a meal, like what are you sending to Ukraine? What does it look like? What's in the packages?
So we now have 10 different kinds of meals. At the time when we first launched domestic, there was just 2. So one was an Easy Mac, one was the beans and rice. The beans and rice was a natural transition from our international meal, which just didn't include beans. All the protein came from soybeans, so it did include beans, but it wasn't something recognizable to people as beans. What they recognized was rice. You boil water to make this rice. There was also some veggies. There was the protein from soybeans. There was a vitamin pack. Before my boss and his wife got involved in feeding people, there was a gentleman decades ago that did this, and he developed that vitamin pack. So it's basically 21 vitamins and minerals, meets the nutritional deficiency of anybody on the planet. It's seasoning in that beans and rice meal. So we just added the pinto beans so it could become a domestic option, because Americans will eat beans and rice. We also, at the same time, took kind of all those same 4 components and made an Easy Mac. So whereas rice was the base ingredient in the first one, pasta became the base ingredient, obviously, in the Easy Mac. The cheese, milk, and butter pack provided the flavoring and those 21 vitamins and minerals. And then the soybean protein goes in. It doesn't taste like anything, but it's just wicked nutritious. So Easy Mac meal that we would provide would have those vitamins and minerals, 11 grams of protein. It actually ends up being 5 times as nutritious as Kraft Easy Mac, which every kid in America has eaten, and it's half as expensive to produce because the volunteers come and pack the meals. And that's a really interesting thing that's kind of morphed during the pandemic, is we used to rely on Sanctuary Church or a Lions Club in Worcester or a different group somewhere in New England that would have a space, like the church had a community space that you could set tables up, that we could put the bins on and the funnels up, and the second half of the line is weigh it, seal it, box it. So after everything goes in the bag, you're making sure that it's the right weight so it meets the nutrition on the bag. Then you heat seal it so it's good nutritionally for a couple of years. It's 3-ply bag, so it's once it's in there and it goes in the box. We were, for the first time, sending it to local food pantries, Greater Boston Food Bank, different places like that, backpack programs, homeless shelters, where clients could actually get the meals and then they just need to boil water to make them. So the whole motto behind the whole thing is ending hunger, enriching lives. So for the first time ever, we were ending local hunger, and then we were mobilizing groups from all over. We'd done that before, but then when the pandemic hit, we were starting to get local volunteers coming to our warehouse to be able to pack the meals. So whereas prior to doing this domestic thing, we'd fed 1 million people, we've now fed 39 million people. A ton of them during the pandemic. 2020 was our biggest year. 2022 might be our biggest year yet.
Let me make sure I heard this right. 39 million people.
Yep.
And in the period of the pandemic, you kind of went from doing it in a little church, and suddenly you're doing it in a whole big warehouse, and you sort of morphed into major traction.
Yeah, and we even got a bigger warehouse, unbelievably. So we had Our first quote-unquote warehouse space was the little storage closet off the lobby of the church where we could fit about 1 pallet worth of product. We can fit 72 pallets worth of product in our new warehouse that we've had for just over a year now. Because the first couple of years with the pandemic, we've been packing in the warehouse we had, which used to literally just be warehouse space. So it wasn't really big enough to have assembly lines. But the governor, the health department, my boss, when they all got together and talked about how to pack during the pandemic, we just kind of like rolled right into it. But we had to like make room. We tore walls out of our warehouse and moved everything around, pulled the cargo van out, like made all the room we could get, and then tried to get really brave South Shore volunteers to come out and pack. Well, now we have like 1,200 volunteers that want to come on a regular basis to pack these meals, school groups, and different. The variety is endless, but the whole point is we have 1,200 groups throughout New England, but 1,200 also warehouse volunteers that want to pack. So if we had unlimited funds, we could literally pack around the clock because the need is so great. Currently, there's 1.7 million hungry people just in New England, and then all those Ukrainian refugees that we've been feeding, we've provided 1 million meals there. So it's kind of limitless on the back end. We're starting to get some grants. We're starting to get some really generous donors. One gives about $40,000 a year to us, and for $75, we can fill another box and feed a couple hundred people. So we're just trying to get all those components to go together, but funding is crucial. We've got all these volunteers that want to do it. More new people. Every time we have a shift, there's literally a new volunteer there every single time. And then we have about 400 different places throughout New England that want the meals, that will take them and get them out to clients that can boil water and eat them and have nutritious meals in their life. So that's kind of the process, and we're just continually growing and it's unfurling.
So the volunteer part is very cool. I mean, you have whole families, you have whole school teams, you have whole schools, whole churches, whole communities, and they do it as sort of almost like a barn raising that day. Mm-hmm. But you can't do it every day. You can't pack the food every day.
So if we had funding, we could pack the food every day. We've got that many groups that want to do it. So whenever a group wants to get involved, I always have to ask, do you have any funding? If they don't have any funding, then I wait for funding to come through, which we're continually collecting money from all over New England. We always pack the meals, and if they're not designated for Ukraine, we get those meals back to where they were funded from. So I just looked at the numbers again. There are 8 Feeding America food banks in New England. So every state has one except Massachusetts has 3. So there's one in the Berkshires, one in Worcester County, Greater Boston Food Bank. If you just made 8 buckets and you took all the funding that was poured into them and we turned it into meals and got it back into those areas, 47% of our meals go to Greater Boston. So almost half. 12% go out to Worcester County and the Berkshires. So we actually have 41% that go out through the other 5 states. So there are more hungry New Englanders fed right in our neck of the woods than all those other 5 New England states combined. That's just how much people have gotten invested in this since the pandemic. They might not know which of their neighbors are hungry, but they do know that there's currently about 120,000 hungry people on the South Shore alone, that we could crank out 120,000 meals a day and just spread them out around here and still not meet the need that's just right around here. So when people get wind of that, they see they can give a bunch of money, they can give a bunch of time, or some combination of both, but then we produce as many meals as we can and give them out for free to the people who need them. So that's just the process we do over and over again, and we're up to 39 million.
And we'll be back with Matt in a minute to hear how he manages to recruit and organize his band of volunteers.
This episode is brought to you by Visit Ithaca, helping you to plan your next getaway. Ithaca has waterfalls and wineries, art and theater, outdoor recreation, and family fun. The area is famous for its glacier-carved gorges, co-op-run businesses, and cultural influences from Cornell University and Ithaca College. The area is well known for its local cideries, which are leading the way in America's cider revival. You can hear from the region's cider makers directly on HRN's series Hardcore. There is something really special about Ithaca's climate for cultivating delicious apples steeped in history and terroir. The second season of Hardcore is out now. You can learn all about apples and fermentation and dive into how cider makers and their communities are working to create an equitable industry and one that is resilient to climate change. Listen to Hardcore on your favorite podcast app.
Hi, I'm Katie Mosman-Wadler, Executive Director of HRN. HRN is dedicated to amplifying voices from all across our food system. Today, I'm asking listeners to take part in our summer membership drive by helping sustain our mission to expand the way eaters think about food. As a thank you for this tax-deductible donation, you can receive some great HRN swag, including the HRN cap, wine carrier, or a special spice set from Burlap and Barrel. By becoming a member, you'll play an essential role in keeping nonprofit food radio on the air. Go to heritageradionetwork.org/donate to become a member today. Thank you for your support.
And we're back with Matthew Martin. So are people shocked that there's so much hunger?
So part of the Ending Hunger, Enriching Lives piece is that a lot of people don't know the extent of hunger. When I share the statistics, especially when the pandemic first hit and hunger doubled around here in the entire state of New Hampshire, hunger doubled, people were like, wow, I didn't even know this was a issue until I'm looking at the news and I'm seeing a 4-hour-long food line that professional people are standing in because they used to have a job and then all of a sudden they don't, or they can't. They're on furlough indefinitely. Like there was so much up in the air that a lot of people started paying attention for the first time, and they're like, wow, this is crazy. Then when we get to the warehouse and they pack meals, like I said, there's always a new person there. We share some of these statistics of, how we're on this roller coaster ride of more hunger than we've ever had. Oh, look, we're down to a 20-year low. Boom, we have more hunger again now than we've ever had. And then now it's starting to come down. Eyes are opened when they hear those type of numbers. A couple million hungry New Englanders when he started this, and then there was more than that during the pandemic at the very beginning, and now you're driving it down again. And then they also start to learn about the issue we have really countrywide with minimum wages just not being enough to actually provide housing. So any minimum wage jobs that are out there are really for kids. I've got teenagers. They can work at a minimum wage job, but if they were adults trying to find housing for their family, it just doesn't happen. When I was homeless, I worked 3 straight months, 100 hours a week. I was 20, and I could barely sustain that for that long, and I had to just take a deep breath and start college again. There's a lot of adults that if they made minimum wage in Massachusetts, we're the state that's 3rd for most expensive housing. So only California and Hawaii have more expensive housing than we do. We have a high minimum wage, but when you do the math, 14 and a quarter, which it is right now, would have to be like 36 for someone to actually just work that and be able to afford. And they're just talking about a 2-bedroom home for rent. They're not trying to buy a home, they're just trying to live somewhere. If they made minimum wage, they have to work 107 hours a week. It's even worse in New Hampshire. It's the only other state in New England that's worse than Massachusetts for that. And up there you have to work all but like 39 hours to be able to afford housing. It's insane. So before the pandemic hit, a lot of people got our meals simply because their rent was too expensive, or they had too many school loans, or medical or dental was more than they could handle. It's too much bread, not enough peanut butter problem is what I say. And when you can provide free, really nutritious, really easy to make meals for folks, it gives them hope and sustains them until they can get into a situation where they either make more money or somehow can have less expenses, or something happens, student loan forgiveness, or something happens where their situation changes. But then the pandemic hit, and then it was like a free-for-all. There was so much need. That's why we've been so busy and ever expanding, because more and more people are finding out about it all the time. More and more people are realizing that for 35 cents you can feed either a Ukrainian refugee or somebody who's hungry around in your neighborhood. It's hardly anything, but somebody's got $35 or $3,500, or like I said, one person gives $40,000 a year. That makes a gigantic impact, allows us to pack a bunch of meals. You've got, during the first part of the pandemic, a lot of homeschool kids that their families, the whole homeschool network was coming. Channel 25 in Boston did a story on us, and they were talking to Miss Massachusetts was there with a bunch of homeschool kids and retired veterans. It was just a mishmash of folks, but it's people that could be there during the day, during the week, when we were all just kind of figuring out, can we get out of quarantine? Like, what are we doing? But some people have a lot of time. Some organizations exist to volunteer. There's a group called South Shore Professionals through the chamber that's just super excited to do stuff because they've got the resources, like the human resources, to do the volunteering part. And we just need those too. We've got plenty of pantries. We've got plenty of need, unfortunately, but we just need money and people, and we can put together and make a huge impact on local hunger.
So when people volunteer, it's kind of a joyous thing for them to do. They feel that they're not just giving money, they're not just giving sort of like their mental energy, they're actually using their hands, and it feels very real to them. How does food get to Ukraine? How do you handle all of that? Is that through the church, or that's through, where does the church fit into any of this, or does it not now?
So we have worked with 87 different kind of groups. So out of our top 10, 4 of them are denominations, they're churches. Catholics are vying to get in our top 10 and push Episcopalians out, but there's a lot of church people involved, but there's a lot of students, there's a lot of nonprofits, the list goes on for that, but really what it is connections. So we recently formed an advisory team. One of the members of that happens to go to a church in Duxbury. He knew somebody who worked with BOC International in Boston. So when we first started talking about how to get meals to Ukraine, we thought, the cost of this is going to double because it's going to be the cost of 35 cents to feed somebody, but then we have to get them there. And BOC is a freight forwarding service. They're gigantic, they're generous, and they actually had all the routes planned and knew what they had to do to get the meals right into the capital in Ukraine. And they said, we're going to fund the first 1 million meals you send, we're going to take care of it. You just get them packed, we'll come to your warehouse, we'll put them in a container, and we'll send them out. So very quickly, in a couple months, we had 3 containers going to Ukraine to get there. Now we're starting to fly them over because somebody, like in a relay race, picked up the second leg of the thing. They're called Direct Relief. So it's another nonprofit that exists to take medical supplies, clothing, food, whatever we have to give, and get it there. So we're obviously doing the food. So our first round of that just happened. We had an event in Greenwich, Connecticut. That community has been super involved in the last few months. They've done 4 events, packing 3 pallets of meals every time. And the last time they packed, instead of getting them back to Pembroke to get them to BOC International out of Boston, we just, Direct Relief came and picked them right up and threw them on a plane and sent them over. The cost is the same no matter who you want to feed, because we have these great groups like BOC International out of Boston and Direct Relief, I think they're out of New York, doing that other second part of it. Normally what happens is a food pantry just comes and loads up. Craig Wolf always does this for veterans in Marshfield. Every month he comes by our warehouse and grabs a dozen boxes to hand them out at the radio station in Marshfield on the second Thursdays, I think it is. So we would normally fund and pack the meals, and then they'd get picked up and distributed locally. We've driven meals to down East Maine or wherever in New England they were funded from to get them out. But the Ukraine part it's just a different process, but they're still going through a channel that gets them to the people in need at the exact same cost to donors.
Wow, this is a pretty intense. This is a pretty intense story. Matt, did you ever think you'd be doing this? Do you think this was the thing you were meant to do, and it just took you that long to discover it? We have been raising a son and a daughter. Our daughter is off to college in a couple months. Our son has a couple years of high school left. But we've tried to explain to them that there is a reason you're on the planet, oftentimes to do what you want to do. If you're going to be a teacher and you want to be a really good teacher, my wife got a master's before we even got to Massachusetts, where a master's is required to keep a teaching job for over 5 years. You just travel down that path. And she was a fantastic teacher. I think I was a pretty fair youth pastor. I got a lot of people engaged in hunger and missions and doing what you do. But I do think there is a reason every single person is on this planet, and it has something to do with the greater good, putting your gifts and whatnot into the mix. It's like the stone soup kind of philosophy that if we are all looking out for each other, the world will be a better place. And this happens to be what I'm doing currently is what I'm supposed to be doing. My boss and his wife meant to retire 18 years ago. They're still doing this. Floyd just turned 80. And this is like super passionate. They had a career before that, had founded the first plastic recycling business in all of North America. So they were making the world a better place in that way. And then they went on a missions trip with some friends right as they retired, and they saw starvation and they got impassioned to do something about that.
They thought it was just going to be for that Tanzania, Kenya area of East Africa where that village was, where they were doing all kind of projects, clean water, nutritious food, medical care, education, subsistence agriculture. They kind of thought that was going to be their focus. Like in Quincy, our focus was 200 Haitian orphans. They kind of thought that was going to be their specific thing, and now they're feeding people all over the world. And they're the meal packaging organization that does domestic. Nobody else has 10 kind of meals to give out locally. That's what Outreach has picked up. They've now fed 675 million people in their retirement, because after New England launched and we had a region, there's other regions now all the way down all the coasts, Gulf Coast, West Coast, all the way down the East Coast, because this kind of got stirred up. So I always tell New Englanders, you got this thing going. It's like the Pilgrims off the boat, and then or Facebook streaming across the world, all these different things that happen here that then happen everywhere. That's what domestic meal packaging is really happening in the entire country. 95% of the meals staying domestic to feed hungry people here because New England did it first. It's unbelievable how in 11 years it's unfolded. We're still leading the way. We still do much more than any other region, but the impact we have, it's like that ripple effect. So whatever we're able to do for New England, fantastic, but it's also spreading all the way down and around the whole country so that Americans get to eat. There's a lot of need throughout our country. There's pockets of severe need. And now the outreach program is able to do that all over the whole country for everybody in our country.
We all thought, at least domestically, that things would get better after the pandemic. And now they haven't really. I mean, they have, but they haven't really. But now we also have inflation, which is crimping people's budgets again. Do you see the impact of that yet?
So the impact is always on the need. There's always really generous people that find resources to share with us so that we can feed people. But I just heard something a couple days ago that 58% of people are paycheck to paycheck. Like they're not sure. I know there's more people that rent than own. I know there's 20-somethings. Most of them are living at home, more than not. It's a majority of that age kids. If you're not at college, you're in your mom's basement because there's just no way to afford. Unless somebody bequeaths a house to you, I don't know how you would ever afford a home as a 20-something in New England. It's crazy, just the amount of expenses, then the inflation. I was at a gas station in Marshfield or Pembroke the other day where there was 25 cars waiting to get gas because it was 30 cents cheaper than the gas station a couple blocks away. I mean, people are pinched, but New Englanders are wicked generous as well. So we're going to get resources, we're going to feed people, but the need is not going away. We were driving it down. We had got from 2 million when we started doing this to 8.5 years in. The day before the pandemic hit, we were at a 20-year low. It was 1.4 million. Then overnight it was 2.1, and now we're down to 1.7. So we're getting somewhere. It may take a couple of years. Somebody from Greater Boston was at one of our events, and they said anybody impacted from the pandemic, 3 to 5 years before they even get back to where they were before they were impacted. So it's kind of like a lot of people's lives or plans or whatever have kind of just been put on hold, and we're just trying to help them through this gap. We're hoping when we come out on the back end that we're going to be at a 25 or 30 or 40-year low, that hunger is going to get pushed way down again. We know we can do it. We've done it before. Now we have this gigantic warehouse. We can have 80 people. South Shore Chamber of Commerce is coming this month in 3 weeks, and all these local businesses are going to be packing meals and funding and just being generous to their communities, to their people that they're serving with their businesses. They're going to help serve the hungry people in their areas. So we're just looking for more and more partners, but it's really just the simple of who's got a bunch of money. Steven Tyler was just at the police station in Marshfield. If he just wrote a big check, we could pack a ton of meals.
Steven Tyler from Aerosmith.
Yeah.
Wow.
He visits his family in Marshfield all the time. If he was able to just hear about us, write a check, we could literally take and make up a ton of boxes and pack nonstop and get all those meals out throughout New England or wherever he wanted them to go, Ukraine, just Greater Boston, whatever. But we've got some resources coming in for money. We want more regular givers. We've got resources coming in for people. We have a ton of regular people, but we'd love to have more. But it's a teeter-totter. You have to have the resources to buy the stuff to put through the funnel before you can put it through the funnel. So we're always keying in on how to get more resources money-wise. We've got tons of people. We got tons of need. We just have to keep working the system so that more local people get nutritious food.
This is a pretty amazing undertaking. Love that. I love the whole thing. And Matt, if people are listening, what's the most useful thing they can do for you?
So if you want to know about us, a pretty easy way is just to Google End Hunger New England, and we're going to pop up. But our website is super simple. It's just End Hunger and then the initials NE for newengland.org. And if you go on there, you're going to see the simple approach. Donate. There's 4 ways to give online. Volunteer. You can get to our Sign Up Genius. You can see 3 shifts available. 1 is for the chamber, so if you're a chamber member, dive into there. Otherwise, grab one of the other 2 or both. And then receive. The next tab down is if you run a backpack program, a homeless shelter, food pantry, you're part of a food bank. Click on that, you email me, you get into our system. We got 400 places to get them. We'd love to have 800 places that get them. And then the last thing on the bottom is just promote. So it's our social media, it's our news stories, it's our whatever you could use to share this story with other people is there. And then we just keep doing it. It's rinse, repeat. It's donate, volunteer, receive. We've done that. More people tell people about it, so we get more donors, we get more volunteers, we get more recipient groups, and we just keep, it's like an avalanche happening.
You just keep priming the pump. This is great. Thanks so much, Matt, for all the good you do. And listeners, if you want to help with your hands or your pocketbook, the website is endhungerne.org. That's endhungerne, as in New England.org. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Let's Talk About Food is produced by The Food Voice. I'm producing, along with audio director and composer Mike Moss of Soundscape Boston. You can find more of our stories at our website, letstalkaboutfood.com, and on Heritage Radio or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's Talk About Food is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.